Welcome back to Liberty Bites on the Think Liberty Network. I'm your host, William Gadsden. You can follow me on Twitter at William_Gadsden and follow Think Liberty on Facebook, Twitter, or whatever your favorite social media outlet is. You can also follow me on Facebook at William Gadsden Political Commentator. So give us a follow and a like for updates on new episodes and more. We also have a Patreon now, so if you'd like to support our work, check it out at patreon.com/ThinkLibertyPatrons. For this episode, we're going to run our last episode of this series concerning Supreme Court cases that have to do with economic policy. Now, I can practically hear the sighs of relief from most of you, but keep a sharp ear out on this one. It involves one of the most stupefyingly idiotic economic regulations that have ever stained United States law. The legislation was called the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1938 and was, unsurprisingly, a part of FDR's New Deal. So under this act, farmers were restricted in the amount of wheat that they could grow and were in fact given subsidies by the federal government to not grow a certain amount of wheat. These subsidies, of course, were gained by exclusively taxing companies that processed farm products, because the government clearly has no understanding of irony. But it doesn't get any better here. The idea behind this ridiculous piece of legislation was to boost agricultural prices by denying the market a surplus. Because limiting food production and artificially inflating food prices is exactly what you want to do when people are starving and are too poor to buy food. I swear, if there wasn't such a strong argument for consistent incompetence in government, I'd think that they were just straight up evil. Anyway, they wanted to boost agricultural market by making these limitations. The argument for the law on the federal level was that since it applies to interstate commerce, it falls under federal purview. So in comes an Ohio farmer named Roscoe Filburn. Filburn, being a law-abiding citizen, was complying with the Agricultural Adjustment Act. He sold no more than his share of wheat on the local market and generally minded his own business. But he was growing more than the limitation allowed. When called on it, he admitted that, yes, he was growing in excess of the limitation, but that all of the excess grown was only to feed his livestock and his family, purely for personal use. Now, despite 2 notices from the government to cease, he continued this practice. So it went to court. Surprisingly, Filburn won in the local district courts. But the government wasn't going to give up their pound of flesh so easily. They appealed it, and it eventually made its way to the Supreme Court. So to set the stage, we have to keep in mind that at this point in time, 8 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices are FDR appointees. It doesn't look too good for Mr. Filburn. So Filburn argues that since the excess wheat is strictly for personal use, it doesn't have the effect of dropping wheat prices in the market. Therefore, the intent of the law is still being met. In turn, the government argues that if he wasn't growing his own for personal use, he would have to buy it on the market at market value. And since he isn't, it is lessening the demand for wheat and thereby hurting the economy. So the question facing the Supreme Court is, again, the width and breadth of the federal government's power to regulate commerce. In this case, though, we're deep into the territory of private property rights, which is precisely what makes this case so dangerous and so important. The federal government has already ruled that they can dictate what farmers can and can't grow on their land in terms of what they bring to market. Now they want to go even further and say that a man can't even keep the fruits of his own labor for personal use and consumption. A point so counter to the Lockean philosophy on which this country was founded, it's appalling that this was ever questioned in the first place to this extent. But I digress. The Supreme Court, in one of the very few occasions in which this has happened, reached a unanimous decision that Congress did have the right to dictate what an individual could do with their personal property. In this case, the excess wheat that Filburn was growing for personal use. The rationale behind this decision was that while Filburn's personal use of excess wheat could not cause significant injury to the market, that if thousands of other farmers followed suit, it could be, in the view of the government, catastrophic to the agricultural economy. Now, in an astonishing logical leap, the Supreme Court decided that one's personal fiscal decisions could be dictated by Congress, based on the ripple effect that such decisions may have on the economy as a whole. A classic example of viewing society and the economy as a whole through the collective lens rather than that of the individual. Instead of even differentiating between whether or not a transaction is interstate or intrastate, or even intrastate or local, the Supreme Court decided to greenlight the use of legislation justified by the Commerce Clause based instead on the effect that an economic transaction may have on interstate commerce. That's not even a logical leap. They pole vaulted that bad boy. This constituted what is by far the broadest expansion of federal power over the economy that the country has ever seen. And this subsequently ushered in a carte blanche policy on the part of the federal government to rampage through state and local jurisdiction on a myriad of issues that wasn't curtailed until U.S. v. Lopez in 1995. So this span of time saw the Commerce Clause used to justify getting the federal government involved in everything from hotels, sexual assault, gun rights, and yes, even the roads, all of which are normally dealt with on a state or local level. So for further reading on these cases, look into Heart of Atlanta Motel, Inc. v. U.S., U.S. v. Morrison, U.S. v. Lopez, and South Dakota v. Dole. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time as we go over one of my favorite Supreme Court cases, the landmark D.C. v. Heller case in 2008, which to this day serves as the best legal defense we have to protect the Second Amendment from steppers. Now, that's not to say that it's the best we could have. There are a lot of flaws in even the majority opinion, which we'll go over. So you won't want to miss it. I hope you'll join us next time to become more liberty-centered with us. I'm William Gadsden with Think Liberty.